Now, there are a lot of takes on the recent mission to Ukraine and Russia. Some have labeled it a waste of time, a chaotic mission, a moment that shows up how little influence we have in Europe. Others have cautioned that this was the opening of a door, and the fact that African leaders and envoys were given an audience by the leaders involved in the conflict validates the fact that they were taken seriously. Well, let's get the views now of seasoned commentators and analysts, and we welcome Africa Analyst and Africa's Open for Business author Victor Kgomoeswana, as well as international government business consultant and AKATA CEO Dr. Charles Sinkala. Good evening to the pair of you. Thank you very much for your time. How big a moment was this for building respect for the role that African leaders can play off the continent in conflict involving, in this case, a significant power such as Russia? And Victor, I'd like to start with you.
Good evening, Dr. Sinkala, and good evening, Iman. Anybody who dismisses this visit as a waste of time might be respected because everybody's view must be respected. But negotiation, Iman, and resolving a conflict, the magnitude of the Russia-Ukraine conflict takes a long time. The conflict, if you look at it as Ukraine and Russia only, you will miss the whole point. This is a global crisis that's going to take a lot of players. We are in the multilateral era, but in that multilateral world order, Iman, Africa is at the center stage of economic potential. Everybody, and I mean everybody in the world, wants to invest on the continent, and South Africa particularly is a leading economy on the continent in many respects. And lastly, Africans have always been negotiating all kinds of settlements, including South Africa here at home, whether you're looking at the DRC, whether you're looking at Ethiopia. Every conflict is eventually going to be resolved through negotiation. And unfortunately, it could take a long time, but talks have to be respected, and every step and every gesture counts.
Dr. Sinkala?
Yes, you see, it's quite interesting that African heads of states and government even took up that space to go and see some fact-finding mission in terms of the two countries. And what is interesting to note was how they were received. You know, even though President Cyril Ramaphosa had a delay in the other part of the neighboring country there, you know, in terms of having access to Ukraine, but in overall, we have seen that there's a sense of negotiating on a diplomatic space, and I think that gives us hope, as we have likely heard from my other fellow panelists, that you know, the world we live in multilateral and bilateral relationships, we can see how the wars between the two countries have dearly not only affected those two countries, but also they have affected the rest of the world in terms of the food prices and as well as the oil and other commodities. But, you know, one will also think that, you know, are we on the position of mediating these conflicts between the two countries? I think, yes, we can try, as Africa now being recognized as part of the global world. But also we can see that, you know, the role players, those who are involved, like the NATO, the West, and the United States of America, should be part and parcel of the finding of peace between the two countries, not by war, but by diplomatic means.
Yeah. Well, we come in accepted by both sides to talk individually, but how does South Africa's actions regarding Russia pre this visit influence how willing the Ukrainians would be to really trust us? Would they have seen us as honest brokers, Victor?
Which actions, Iman? You mean the allegations about Lady R and what was?
We're talking about our position in the UN, our position when it comes to the Lady R issue. Of course, we're investigating, but those were serious allegations that are made. South Africa's stated neutrality on the issue.
Yeah. Remember, South Africa's neutrality does not say we don't want a solution. All the neutrality is saying is we are pro-peace, and we would like to make sure that the two sides, which we believe have a right to be heard, each of them, can be listened to. Now, if you go into a feud, Iman, and you find me and Prof. Dr. Sinkala there having an argument, and you start by pronouncing your stance, you are antagonizing the other side. So I think neutrality, although I know it's not seen as a very bold step, it's actually what's going to work, because by being non-aligned, you are in a position to be able to listen to everybody and be listened to. Now, somebody might take a dim view, but if Ukraine had taken a dim view of South Africa, they wouldn't have listened to President Ramaphosa. They wouldn't have hosted him, which means already what is seen as neutrality is actually non-alignment, which in a conflict can count for more than taking sides.
Dr. Sinkala, your view on this and how it, as Victor is saying, didn't seem to, have put South Africa, particularly in its role as part of this mission, on the back foot.
Yes, man, one would think like that, but otherwise, South African position, I think, is the best position that any other country who means peace in this world will have to undertake. You cannot force one nation to be aligned just because of the United States of America supports one other country as Ukraine and does not conform to what Russia's interests are in this war and in the ending the war. I think we have seen a sense of moving forward, even if though this should have taken space a long time ago, in terms of negotiating. But, who are we as Africans to stop this war between the two countries? I think to some extent that this invasion, the Russia is fighting the West. We can see how as well South Africa has been positioned into the new now organization called the BRICS, and all those things and the conundrums that are affecting. And as well, we can't forget about the United States accusing South Africa that they are only supporting Russia and they have no interest in the war. But one also would be very interested to understand that for every conflict, there's a third party involved. If those third parties are not being part and parcel of the negotiating, we shall continue pointing fingers at innocent countries such as South Africa, which has got no party to the war.
Would you like to just expand on that a little bit more vis-a-vis these third parties?
Yes, Iman, there's nothing which happens by accident. Everything happens by appointment. In totality, between the United States of America and the West, the NATO, and all other organizations who are part of this war, they've turned over close to $400 billion in the last 12 months. And it's a lucrative business in terms of creating war and instabilities within countries or regions. And it has been demonstrated in the past that these are, systems, in terms of military complex, where people, would like to maximize their profits at an expense of killing other individuals. These wars, yes, they can be reviewed as these conflicts between the two neighboring countries, Ukraine and Russia, but it is beyond that. The third parties who are involved is the NATO, who are advancing within the Ukrainian territories, which also threatens the Russian territories on the other side. But the point, what I'm trying to say is in every effort of resolving conflicts between nations, we must also consider what are the possible third parties who are involved. You can see how the United States of America has financed and fueled the supply of military equipment to Ukraine, which is significantly, and at the end of the day, just fueling the process of war. If one will ask the United States of America, can you stop supplying these arms and ammunition? Will the Ukrainians be at stake or at peace? These are the questions that shall leave us for us to answer.
And again, there's been a lot of talk about this in terms of, where does the money go? Who stands to benefit? The Kremlin spokesperson, Victor Dmitry Peskov, said today Russia would continue to talk to Africa's to African countries at the Russia-Africa summit, which takes place next month, saying some of the ideas were workable. They didn't specify which ones. But given what Putin said on Saturday, that he believes some of the proposals made by the delegation were misguided, we've seen that the plan is dismissed by the Ukraine until every last Russian soldier leaves Ukrainian lands. How will we measure the impact of this specific intervention?
I like what Dr. Sinkala said, and that's important because when Ukraine makes demands like that, I wouldn't want to use disrespectful words, but you are part of yes, it's your land, it's your territory, but this is NATO advancing in violation of some agreements in the past. When the USSR and when the Cold War ended, if I may just, the Minsk Agreement, I think it's called, when the Cold War ended, there were agreements as to who may do what, who may not go where, who may advance. Now, to have Ukraine say every Russian soldier must leave when they know that they are a buffer zone by allowing by allowing NATO to occupy Ukraine, which, by the way, Russia has said, we are happy if you don't want to be part of us, but don't join NATO, because by joining NATO, you are bringing the enemy to our borderline. And that way, if you think about it, Ukraine could be making wild demands. Russia could make wild demands, and this is not going to go anywhere. In the end, I think when people approach a negotiating table, which I believe they are already, they might be seen like they are fighting, but they are ready, they are preparing themselves for negotiation. If you might have heard, there are reports that some of the senior officials in Ukraine are beginning to think this war cannot be won. So I would just think, Iman, that we will have to wait until those discussions, because the tactics that are being used, some is saber rattling, some is almost just making demands that people know cannot be met.
I want to leave Dr. Sinkala with you and this final question, which I'm going to pick up with the presidential spokesperson, Vincent Magwenya, later on in the program, is the other issue, the chaos around the presidential security detail not given that clearance in Warsaw, Poland, left there on the tarmac of Warsaw Chopin Airport, exposing what analysts say are embarrassing failures in basic competencies needed to get the paperwork done, and the security team and the journalists there. How humiliating were the optics for us?
Well, that was a quite unfortunate incident. You know, it is not only this time that President Cyril Ramaphosa and his delegation had to fly through Poland. You know, they made some fair arrangement in terms of the Vienna Convention 1961 and 1963 in terms of diplomatic corps. President Cyril Ramaphosa must be recognized and cannot be delayed as such what Poland has done. I think that has to be strongly condemned in terms of moving forward. And, you know, this should have been happened, it should have been avoided. We can see the frustrations from his team, but all what we can say is that, you know, in every war, there are people who take sides. And if you are not on their side, then they might consider you to be part of the enemy, those that they are fighting, you know. But we are very glad and happy as Africa that President Cyril Ramaphosa traveled safely, you know, and completed his mission, that the mission he went to represent all African states, you know, in terms of mitigating the risk and as well as the economic activities, which has affected us dearly in terms of this Russia invasion in Ukraine.
Thank you very much to the pair of you for your time this afternoon. We appreciate it. Africa Analyst and Africa's Open for Business author, Victor Kgomoeswana, and international government business consultant and CEO of AKATA, Dr. Charles Sinkala.